One of the common questions that we get at BEMA is, or responses maybe, is people pushing back against the early Noah episode. We're going through the story of Noah, not the first one about the flood. There's a second episode about a misplaced curse, and we talk about the midrash that speaks of Noah's castration, and that just really throws people off, and it feels like such a weird. It feels like such a weird, jarring. People just respond in a very negative way, and it's understandable. That story shows up very early in the podcast journey, and obviously I made the intentional decision to go there with the episode, and there's a reason that I did that. And so a lot of people will respond back with, it makes a whole lot more sense if he sleeps with his mother than the castration. The castration is nowhere in the text. I don't feel like that's insinuated at all. I have a really hard time understanding why you made that leap. It makes so much more sense that he sleeps with his mother. And people will often send me a link to the late Dr. Heiser's material, where Dr. Michael Heiser talked about here's all the textual references, and here's why it makes sense that he sleeps with his mother, and there's other textual scholars that have said similar things. And from a textual criticism perspective, it makes a ton of sense. And I love textual criticism. I will engage in that all throughout our journey throughout BEMA. So why do I not do that here? Because one of the things that I'm trying to do is I'm trying to teach us how to be guided by Jewish wisdom, not just examine the text, but to realize that this text is an ancient Jewish story written by Jewish authors to Jewish audiences. And so therefore, I want to be informed by Jewish commentary, Jewish wisdom, Jewish tradition in how they saw the text. I don't find that inspired. I don't find the Jewish tradition inspired in the same way that maybe an Orthodox Jew might as a Jesus follower, but I do want to be informed by that perspective and by that wisdom. And the reason that I do that is because there's some form of accountability that I want to stay tethered to. I don't want to just have a bunch of tools on the internet and go study the Bible and just come up with my own. And I realize that other scholars have come up with their own ideas, but here's what I'm fascinated by. That explanation is pretty readily accessible. It's pretty easy to come by. And lots of people have seen it, especially throughout the last couple centuries of textual criticism. So if it's that easy to see, how come the Jewish tradition didn't go that direction in 3,000 years worth of midrash? How come in 2,000 years worth of discussion, Jewish tradition didn't at least once say, this is the answer to that question? It intentionally avoids what should be a more obvious conclusion. And I want to be fascinated with the question of why. Why did Jewish tradition avoid what seems to be a more obvious conclusion? And the reason is because Jewish wisdom says that actually in the text, there are hints that the story is not about that, but about something else. Jewish tradition will point to the curse. Why does Noah not curse the offender, Ham, but instead curses the progeny, Canaan? If this is just a transgression where Ham sleeps with his mother, then the guilty party, the offender, should be the one that receives the curse. Why is the grandchild, why is the child of Ham the one who receives the curse? This makes no sense unless the story is about something more. And so Jewish tradition and midrash tells this ridiculous story about Noah being castrated instead of taking the obvious route that seems to be a more logical conclusion. And the reason is because of how it changes the meaning to the story. And we do talk about this, by the way, in session 6. If you If you saw in the show notes, I believe we actually link this episode, this later episode, in the show notes to the early episode titled The Misplaced Curse. But I'll put the link to the podcast episode in the description to this video. But the story of Noah, if the story is about Ham sleeping with his mother, then who is the obvious offender? Who's the sinner? It's Ham. And this is a story of sexual immorality, of disobedience, of rebellion, of promiscuity. And Ham is the offender, and Noah is somewhat of an innocent bystander, which seems to ignore the details of the story, which happens to be the curse at the end, the culmination of this. Why is the curse? It really isn't about any of that. It's just about Ham and the mother. So why bring the curse into the story? If the Jewish tradition is right, and this is about Noah cursing the grandchild, if this isn't about Ham sleeping with his mother, but if this is about Noah being castrated, the story is now about vengeance. And that story of vengeance, who's the ultimate offender in that story? Noah. You could say it starts with Ham, but then it culminates and finds its fullest expression in Noah's thirst for vengeance, which ends up cursing not just the offender, but the offender's children and an entire line of nations that come after. You see, the point of the Jewish story, the point of Jewish wisdom is trying to tell us this isn't just a story of sexual immorality, personal rebellion, promiscuity, and disobedience. This is a deeper story about the danger of vengeance and what vengeance can do to entire people groups. And so as I record this video right now, there is a major conflict in the Middle East, as there always is, but right now there's a major war between Israel and Hamas in the land of Gaza, and it's a complete and total mess. And we've been doing this back and forth for quite some time, for many, many years, many, many decades, many, many centuries, many, many millennia. Do you see how the wisdom, this very conflict that we're watching in the news today, is the result, in a narrative sense, and the story is a result of the very curse that Noah put on Ham and Canaan and their descendants all the way back at the beginning of the story. The point is not that they're cursed. The point is that this is all the result of Noah's refusal to give vengeance to God. Let God deal with justice. Let God deal with vengeance. Let God deal with vindication. You be a person who trusts the story, who trusts and walks in forgiveness, and walks in love, and walks in grace, and walks in mercy, and let God see. The wisdom of the Jewish tradition is to point out the real story here is a story about vengeance, not just another story about personal sin. And that deeper story is what we want to learn how to get to. There is a wisdom in the Jewish tradition. It's not always right. Even Jewish tradition, Maimonides, says any man that believes all of the midrash is a fool, and any man that believes none of the midrash is a heretic. So it's somewhere in the middle. So the goal here isn't that Jewish tradition is always true and always right, and Jewish wisdom is infallible or inspired. The goal is to realize that these original commentators of the scripture are trying to lead us to a deeper wisdom, not just moral codes, not just what to think and what to do, but how to think, and how there is a deeper truth. And that's why I push back, and that's why I hold myself accountable to the Jewish midrash, to the Jewish tradition. I tether myself to that to make sure that I'm teaching the larger points that wisdom sees within that greater story. So those are some of the thoughts for all of you that send in questions going, the Noah thing makes me really uncomfortable. I get it. We want to push past the uncomfortable nature to ask the question of what is the deeper and greater wisdom hiding behind the thing behind the thing. Because if we can learn that, we will learn something fresh and new in the text. So may that be something helpful. It is a hard thing to learn. It is a hard thing to stay committed to. But that's part of the reason why I try to lead us around some uncomfortable corners so that we can experience how to engage with Jewish wisdom, because we will typically want to drift away from it and go to places that make more logical sense, and will miss the greater treasure that the midrash is trying to teach us. So those are some things to think about. If it's helpful, great. If it's not, just know that I understand. I get it. Especially if you're at the beginning of the BEMA journey, it feels like such a weird, disruptive thing to go through. So hopefully that's helpful. We'll look forward to the next time that we have questions and the next time that we're disrupted in our journey of wrestling with the text and the Jewish tradition that surrounds it.